My Hero Academia creator Horikoshi mentioned at the 2018 San Diego Comic Convention that Deku's father, Hisashi Midoriya, will definitely be revealed in the future. Earlier this year it was revealed that Boku no Hero Academia will be completed more or less in a year, so there are only a few chapters left until the grand finale. And consequently, the promised reveal of Deku's father. Could All For One really be Deku's father? We'll show you why based on recent events, it really can only be All For One. If you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video, let's go! Deku's father, Hisashi Midoriya, has been completely absent from the story so far. In fact, he was only mentioned once in the first episode when Deku and his mother had an appointment with Dr. Garaki due to Deku's non-existent quirk. In that scene, we learned that his father has a fire-breathing quirk, and that's almost all we know. His name Hisashi can be interpreted as long time no see, inspired by the Japanese saying Hisashi Buri, so his name itself is a reference to his absence in My Hero Academia, and at the same time a foreshadowing that he will eventually return because of the way this phrase is used. That is, when you actually meet someone after a long time and then say, oh, long time no see. What else do we know? We know that his work keeps him busy abroad. This was mentioned in the character description of Deku's mother, Midoriya, so that is the reason why he's not at home. When Deku was born, his father apparently left Japan to pursue his work, and has not returned or contacted his family since. The fact that Deku's father is not in his life at all is quite obvious because Deku himself never talks about him. This is a big clue that Hisashi Midoriya never, not even once, made contact with Deku in any way. He never once visited him, never called him, never sent him a letter for his birthday or a Christmas present. He simply did nothing. There are no pictures of him in the house, nor any sign that a man lives there. Hisashi does not have a single item in his own house. And even if we ignore all these materialistic things and the non-existent communication attempts, the biggest clue of all is that Deku's mother herself never talks about Hisashi Midoriya. The only time she was forced to mention him at all was when she was asked specifically about him, with Deku not even showing a reaction. If Deku's father was someone to be proud of, such as a professional hero, then of course she would have told Deku all about him, especially since Deku is a total hero nerd. And Deku in turn will talk a lot about Hisashi himself. Also, if Deku's father were a great hero, he would be known. Obviously, this is not the case either. So if Hisashi isn't a top international hero, what job keeps him so busy that he hasn't been able to come home for a single day in 16 years? Even if we could actually find such a job, then that job must either be extremely important or really well paid. But in either case, it just doesn't make sense why he wouldn't contact his family even once. Even people on the moon can communicate with their family. And if we're being completely honest, Deku isn't exactly swimming in money either. So even if there's a job that prevents any communication, I expect at least a high salary as a compensation. Especially for the family members who suffer from the absence of their husband and father due to such a job. But here there's absolutely no sign of such a source of money. They do not own a house, but rent an ordinary apartment. They don't seem to be poor, but Deku's definitely not rich either. And that says a lot about Hisashi's job or possible relation with his own family. So the idea that Hisashi is a good father and loving husband, but at the same time has a job that doesn't pay much, and also keeps him away from his family for 16 years, without them seeming even remotely concerned, just doesn't add up. Either Midoriya is manipulated by some quirk that makes her believe this ridiculous story, or she's extremely naive. Or else, and this is the last possibility, she's simply lying to Deku for some reason. However, the fact that Deku's father does not have a well-paying job or is famous in any way does not mean that what he does is not important, but rather that he does something because he has a very good reason for doing it that goes far beyond the importance of money and even family, perhaps something that is very important to the world. So his work must be more important than the sacrifice he has to bear, or he simply had no other choice. Maybe he is forced actively or indirectly. Actively, for example, if he is a hostage or a prisoner, whether kidnapped or legally imprisoned. Indirectly, for example, if he simply has no other choice due to certain circumstances. It could be something that prevents him from ever contacting his family, for example, because it would be dangerous for them otherwise. If Hisashi is forced to cut off all ties to his own family, then of course he can't send them any money. If he can't even call his own son once a year, then of course that explains why there are absolutely no belongings of Hisashi in the house. This must mean that Midoriya is a aware of the situation and the danger of being associated with her own husband. Their connection must be kept secret. In this particular case, where his presence in her life is dangerous to her and Deku, I wouldn't be surprised if Hisashi isn't even his real name. To be honest, considering all the things mentioned so far, there are only a few options. As I said, he's either a prisoner or a hostage, which is very unlikely. I just don't see how that could have any significance in the series. Or he even died and Inko Midoriya is keeping this a secret because none other than Deku himself was the one who killed his own father, with a possible quirk he had from birth. The idea that in the case of Hisashi's death, only Deku could be the one who killed him, or at least be in some way responsible, is made clear by the fact that Inko would otherwise simply have no reason to lie. And of course we know that it is believed that Deku was born without a quirk. But imagine if Dr. Garaki had simply lied and shown an X-ray of any other child, just to cover up that someone had stolen Deku's quirk, for example. In this case, Deku may actually have been born with a quirk that manifested at a very young age, so that Deku simply doesn't remember it. For example, the first quirk user was already born with an awakened quirk, so it is not impossible. Let's say the decay quirk. Imagine that Deku was born with this quirk. He couldn't have accidentally destroyed his own father and the whole house, like Shigaraki did. This will then be a possible reason why there are no items from Hisashi left in their new home, and also would explain why they are living in an apartment now, when they may have had a house in the past. In this theory, Inko did what any mother will do for her child to protect them. She lies about what really happened and does everything in her power to prevent Deku from ever remembering it, or from it ever happening again. She could have turned to All For One like the Aoyama family did, but instead of giving Deku a quirk, she asked All For One to take it away. There are always two reasons why people turn to All For One. Firstly, to get a quirk, and secondly, to lose a quirk. So it's possible that All For One took Deku's quirk, and in the case of the decay quirk, later gave it to Tenko Shimura. As mentioned earlier, this idea fits well with the decay quirk, as Tenko himself was too old to receive a quirk, meaning that All For One must have definitely given him the decay quirk at some point, so that Tenko will destroy his own family and thereby become the perfect vessel for All For One. We saw All For One bring Tenko Shimura home one day, which was probably the moment he gave him the decay quirk. Shortly after that, the quirk manifested, and then Shigaraki destroyed his entire house and family. This in turn means that the decay quirk logically had to be stolen from someone in order for Shigaraki to obtain it in the first place. And given the destructive and uncontrollable nature of the decay quirk, it is not unlikely that the person who originally possessed this quirk actually voluntarily sought out All For One so that he could take this quirk away. In the case of Deku, of course, it was not Deku himself who sought out All For One, but his mother Inko Midoriya, since in this example Deku was too young. Let's do some quick math. Deku is now 16 and Shigaraki is now 21. A difference of 5 years. So, considering that Shigaraki was 5 years old when he manifested his quirk, but that quirks manifest in children at the age of 4 at the latest, means that he could only have received this quirk from All For One, and the fact that there's a phenomenon of children being born with an already manifested quirk, as we saw with the first quirk user, would mean that Deku, who had just been born at the time Shigaraki was 5, could have already manifested the decay quirk, which All For One could have taken away at Inko's request, and then passed on to Shigaraki shortly thereafter. The age gap literally fits perfectly. All For One could have then told Inko that if Deku ever starts asking questions about his quirk, she should just go to Dr. Garaki. He already knows everything and will take care of the matter and make Deku believe that he was born without a quirk, and so Deku will even be legally registered as a person without a quirk, even though he was actually born with a quirk. This is definitely a possibility that would connect Deku to Shigaraki. The revelation of Deku's father in this case would not mean that his father is still alive or important, but simply that All For One will give one of his typical villain speeches by revealing something traumatic about someone's past. In this case, Deku's past. Like how he revealed to Endeavor that Toya was a seed, for example. Or how he revealed to All Might that Tomura Shigaraki is actually Tenko Shimura. Yami will now continue with his My Hero Academia theory. Enjoy.
Then of course there's the already mentioned possibility that it is not safe for Deku and his mother if Hisashi stays with them, or if someone knows that they are related. In that case, Hisashi would be working on something very important, and unless it's something related to the Quirk singularity or something to do with the origin of the Quirks, which could then lead to a sequel series, I just don't see how this would fit in now in the series finale. There are only a few dozen chapters left until the end of the entire series, so if there isn't a sequel, Hisashi Midoriya isn't just gonna turn the entire series upside down with a crazy plot twist and change the entire story. That's just not happening. There is no time to build the emotional bond between Deku and his father. The few remaining chapters will not be enough to develop the plot to the point where the readers are really satisfied with such a father revelation, or even manage to care for a completely new character who was only mentioned once many years ago. There are no emotions, no stakes, no plot. It will just feel weird and forced. So there are only a few ways left to describe Deku's father. He's not part of Deku's life, simply because he does not want to be. Considering the fact that the promised reveal of Hisashi Midoriya obviously has to have something to do with the last story arc, and the fact that there is no time left to introduce anything new, it has to be a character who is already well introduced and that wouldn't change the entire story at the last minute. The only character we know who is important and also part of the final story arc, and who can be assumed to not even care about their own child, is All For One. It may sound a little absurd at first, but if you think about it and take into account everything we've mentioned, it really can only be him. So let's talk about the idea that All For One could be Deku's father. At the center of this theory is of course Horikoshi, the author of My Hero Academia, and his love for the Star Wars series. There are quite a few references, from city names to concepts to plot points and even characters. We all know them, and if you don't, just Google the references at the end of the video, or right now, and then come back to whatever suits you better. You'll understand what I mean. The most interesting and also the most important reference for this theory is of course the face of Darth Vader compared to All For One, especially their mask with the integrated breathing apparatus that they both depend on if they want to survive. And the missing piece to make the whole reference perfect is that in Star Wars, the villain is the father of the main hero, which would then mean that All For One could actually be Izuku's father.
I am your father.
One of the most intriguing parts of this theory is that because All For One is a first generation Quirk user, this would genetically make Deku a second generation Quirk user, even if his mother is from a much later generation. The important point about this idea is that because of the mutation, or rather evolution of people with quirks, with each new generation, their feet begin to change for some reason, so that the youngest generation of Quirk users always have one less joint in their little toe, if they were born with a quirk. But this was not always the case. In terms of evolution, it doesn't happen from one generation to the next, but over the course of several generations, bit by bit, until it completely becomes a part of human anatomy. So it is very possible that this phenomena was not already part of the second generation of Quirk users, and if it was, it only occurred rarely. With time and new generations, this change in the little toe became more common until it became the norm among Quirk users. As a result, it became a proven method of identifying Quirk users. But, as explained, it doesn't work for second generation Quirk users, with Deku possibly being second generation if All For One is his father. This would mean that Deku could have been born with a quirk, but his feet could falsely indicate that he was not supposed to have a quirk. If this were indeed the case, it would mean that All For One must have stolen Deku's quirk. Obviously, All For One loves to process many and strong quirks, so this would definitely be a sick reason for a sick person to make children just to create new quirks and steal them. Something like a quirk farm, maybe even with the hope of creating another All For One quirk for some reason, or evolving the All For One quirk into an even more powerful version, due to the concept of Quirk singularity, where quirks become even more powerful with each new generation. To create an even more powerful All For One quirk, he simply has to use the Quirk singularity to his own advantage. All he has to do is make children with women from a later generation in which the Quirk singularity has already shown strong changes in the quirks, thus strengthening the All For One quirk with these genes. The resulting children, of course, would then have a very high chance to awaken an All For One type of quirk due to the fact of how the inheritance of quirk works. seeds. Perhaps he also somehow modified the children with the help of Dr. Garaki. We know that he has prepared many seeds in case something goes wrong with Shigaraki. For example, one of those seeds is Toya Todoroki. So who knows, maybe Deku is also such a seed, and All For One doesn't himself know it yet because he just lost track of all the seeds over time. This doesn't even necessarily have to do anything with the father theory anymore. So let's just ignore that for a moment. If All For One really modified thousands of children in this way, he probably used all the children who visited Dr. Garaki. Maybe All For One even knew that one for all quirk could only be given to someone without the quirk. So he prepared many children to have no quirk and made them seeds instead, hoping that one of them would eventually receive one for all. Of course, there is nothing better than an All For One seed that does not need to steal one for all because it already has that quirk. Yeah, I know that there's no evidence that Deku is such a seed, and All For One does not make it seem to be the case either, but perhaps All For One has simply lost track of all the children, but has a method to make the seeds recognizable when the time comes. Maybe it has something to do with the transformation to the ultimate demon lord, some kind of power that he requires to make the seeds visible to him. It would be crazy if he suddenly realized that Deku is one of the seeds. But let's just face it, as crazy as this twist might be, it would be game over immediately if there is something to the idea that All For One modified a bunch of kids while Deku, due to the proven connection to Dr. Garaki, is part of those kids. Then something simply must have gone wrong with Deku's process. Otherwise, it's looking bad for the heroes and the whole world. If, on the other hand, All For One really stole Deku's quirk but failed to make him a proper seed, then ironically, he would have laid the foundation for the hero who would defeat him in the future. And that would be a very good twist. And that's it for this video. What do you guys think? Could All For One really be Deku's father? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like. It helps us a lot to continue the My Hero Academia content. And if you want to see more Boku no Hero Academia videos, subscribe to our channel with the notification bell activated. We make weekly My Hero Academia videos, theories, and chapter reviews. Thanks for watching and see you guys later. Bye!